My name is Lisa, and I'm here to share something deeply personal. I've lived long enough to understand that life, with all its twists and turns, often throws us into places we never thought we'd go. But I also know that sharing our stories, our real, unfiltered stories, can help us make sense of it all. I started a small channel called Grandmother's Voice because I wanted to connect with other women like me, who've walked through life's storms and come out the other side, sometimes stronger, sometimes scarred. This story I'm about to tell you isn't easy to share. It's about my son, my adopted son, and the day he decided to turn his back on me. It's about the heartbreak that came from a simple invitation, or, rather, the lack of one. My son was graduating from college, a moment I thought I'd never miss. But when the invitation didn't come, I felt a pain so deep that I thought I might never recover. It wasn't just about missing his graduation. No, it was about the years of love, sacrifice, and hope that seemed to fade into nothing. What happened to us? How did we get here? These are the questions I still ask myself every day. And I want to share that with you because I believe it might help someone else who is walking a similar path. Stay with me, and I'll tell you everything. It all started many years ago, when I first held Pedro in my arms. He was just a baby then, so small, so fragile. I can still feel the warmth of him, the way his little body curled up against mine, as if we had known each other for a lifetime. He wasn't my flesh and blood, but in those early years, it didn't matter. I loved him like my own. There's a bond that forms between a mother and child, no matter how they come into the world. And Pedro and I had that bond. I watched him grow from a baby into a curious little boy, full of life and energy. But those first years weren't always easy. There were nights I couldn't sleep, not because of the joy of motherhood, but because of the fear. Fear that he would somehow feel different. Fear that he would sense that he wasn't mine in the way that other children were theirs. And there were the nightmares, his little cries in the dark, which would send me running to his side, only to hold him and whisper softly that everything would be okay. But I knew, deep down, that the journey ahead would be filled with questions that I couldn't yet answer. We had our routines, our little rituals. Every day, I'd make lunch, and every day, Pedro would ask me for a note to put in his lunchbox. Not a note about the food. No, he wanted a note from me. A little reminder that I was there, that I cared. I'd write the simplest things. I love you, my dear, or you are my heart, always. And he'd smile. That beautiful smile, the one that made everything worth it. But even in those small moments, I knew we were both holding our breath. What if one day, he stopped asking for those notes? What if one day, he stopped needing me like he did then? As Pedro entered adolescence, something began to change. It wasn't big or immediate, but a slow distance, as if he were pulling away from me without even realizing it. The conversations, once so easy, began to get shorter. He no longer wanted the notes in his lunchbox. He didn't need that constant attention that I thought he needed. I, who always knew what he needed, now found myself hesitant, insecure, trying to understand what was happening inside that boy I knew so well, but who was becoming a stranger to me. And then came the more obvious signs. The hours he spent locked in his room, the friends that appeared, and the way he talked about everything without involving me, as if I were no longer part of his world. What happened to the bond we always had? I asked myself that question over and over. I knew that adolescence was a time of transformation, but I never imagined that his transformation would leave me so far behind. How could someone who once called me mom now treat me like a burden? These first signs of distance hit me hard. I tried to understand, of course. I tried to put myself in his shoes, to be the understanding mother who respected the need for independence. But inside, the pain of being left behind started to consume me. That boy, who had been my world, was pulling away from me in a way that I couldn't control. And it was here, at this stage, that the real beginning of my pain started. The big turning point came when Pedro discovered his biological family. I knew something was changing when he started spending more time on the phone, more time outside the house. One afternoon, he told me he had made an important discovery. He had found his biological mother. He seemed anxious, as if he was hiding something, and from that moment on, things began to feel strange. The conversations we used to have about the little and big things in life started to disappear. He talked less with me, and whenever I asked about what he was doing, he would shut down into an uncomfortable silence. That was when his behavior changed abruptly. The attitude of a loving son that had been so warm began to vanish. replaced by a distance I couldn't understand. I didn't know if this was just a phase, or if something deeper was happening within him. He started talking about his biological family more and more, and the most painful part was when he began treating me as if I were just a friend. In a matter of days, the relationship we had built over so many years seemed to crumble before my eyes. I tried to understand. I tried to be strong. As a mother, I knew that the need to reconnect with one's origins was natural. But the way he acted, the way he looked at me made me feel as though I were a shadow of what I had once been to him. I asked myself, what did I do wrong? And the answer, or the lack of it, haunted me. The most painful change came in a simple gesture. It was just any other afternoon, like so many before, but the word he used cut me in a way I still feel today. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he walked in without looking at me. When he asked if he could go out, he didn't call me Mom, as he always had. He called me by my name. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip. He did it on purpose. The sound of the word, said that way, felt so strange to me that my heart skipped a beat. In that moment, something inside me broke. I knew things were changing, but at that instant, I realized he had already made his choice. How could someone who once called me Mom with so much affection no longer see me as such? It was as if, by stopping calling me Mom, he was pushing me away from his heart. It wasn't just a matter of words, it was a matter of feeling. He had replaced me, as if I were an old item, a part of the past that no longer belonged in his new life. I held myself together, not wanting him to see my pain, but inside, everything was falling apart. As a mother, I had hoped that, even with time, the bond would remain, that the words and gestures of affection would continue, but instead, I felt a deep emptiness. Why was he pushing me away like this? What had I done to deserve this? And worse, how could I keep loving him the same way when he no longer saw me as his mother? Each day, conversations about the biological family became more frequent, and I realized it wasn't just curiosity anymore. He was getting involved, surrendering to something I couldn't understand. I had heard him talk about her before, but now, the mentions were constant, as if he were trying to fit his story into a narrative that no longer had room for me. He spoke with such intensity that unsettled me, with that glint in his eyes, that enthusiasm that I no longer saw in our moments together. I felt more and more invisible. It was hard, very hard to hear Pedro talk about his biological mother, as if she were someone he had known for a long time, when, in fact, she had always been distant, far away, like a vague and unreal image. But somehow, she had become more important, more central. I kept wondering if he saw her as a heroine, or if she was just an idealized figure, someone he projected everything he was missing from me onto. And I, who had always been his mother, found myself lost in a competition I didn't even know how to begin to understand. And it was on one of those days, while he spoke enthusiastically about plans to visit her, that a question escaped me without thinking. "Don't you miss me, Pedro?" He looked at me surprised, as if it were the first time someone had asked him that. But he didn't answer. He just looked away, and for a moment, I saw the shadow of what he was becoming. Someone I no longer recognized. It was just any Sunday, the kind of afternoon you spend without expecting any big changes. But soon something caught me completely by surprise. Pedro walked into the living room with that smile, as if he were bringing news he had been holding on to for a while. "Mom, the farewell dinner from college is next Friday. It's going to be an important moment, you know. My family will be there." Those words dropped like a stone on my chest. He spoke so naturally, as if it was obvious, but I could feel that there was a gap between the words and their meaning. The word family now seemed to carry a different weight, colder, more distant. I didn't say anything right away. I stood there, trying to process what I had just heard. He called me Mom, but when he spoke of family, it seemed like the word no longer included me. Could that have been a coincidence? Or was he preparing me for what was to come next? I didn't dare ask anything more, but the unease inside me grew. I knew that dinner wouldn't just be a college farewell. It would be the farewell to something I never imagined. It was as if he was saying, without words, that this moment was a dividing line. In the days that followed, the idea of the dinner wouldn't leave my mind. How could something so simple, something any mother would feel honored to participate in, turn into an event that made me feel like a stranger in my own home? How could he, just like that, leave me out? And worse, what did he see in that dinner that made him exclude me, so clearly, without hesitation? Friday finally arrived, and with it, the weight of waiting. I knew that the farewell dinner would be the turning point. Pedro, as always, seemed so oblivious to what I was feeling, so distant from what had meant so much to me. I had prepared myself for the moment when he would call me, with that look of a son who wants his mother's presence, but he never made that invitation. It was on the phone, a cold, direct message. "Mom, I'm going to the dinner. I've made plans with my friend. Just wanted to let you know." He called me Mom, but the lack of an invitation to accompany him, the absence of any recognition that this was also a farewell that involved me, cut me in a way that words couldn't. I stood in silence, staring at the phone screen. The phone felt heavy in my hand, like an object with no purpose anymore. It was clear what he meant, but at the same time, the pain was there, so obvious. He hadn't invited me. I was no longer part of his life in the way I had imagined. What once felt natural, the simple act of wanting his mother to be present in important moments, now seemed like a burden, an obligation he preferred to avoid. I wondered how long he had been hiding behind empty words, hoping I would understand something he really didn't want me to know. Deep down, I knew that message wasn't just about the dinner. It was about what was happening inside him, what he was becoming, and how he no longer saw me as the woman who had once cared for him, who had once given him everything. There was no more space for me in his life, and he made that clear, with every gesture, every word. The one excluded wasn't just the woman who wanted to be there, but the mother who, no matter how much she had given, now seemed irrelevant to the son she had raised with so much love. The dinner came, and I wasn't there. I held myself together, trying not to think about it, but the pain was unbearable. When Pedro returned home that night, he seemed exhausted, but at the same time, there was something in his eyes that made me feel like something was breaking between us. He didn't say much, but one phrase cut through me in a way I could never have imagined. "Mom, the dinner was amazing, but, it was only for the royal family. You wouldn't fit in." He said it with the naturalness of someone merely describing what was obvious to him, but to me, those words were like sharp knives, piercing my heart mercilessly. I looked at him, trying to keep control, but the tears started flowing before I could stop them. How could he say something like that? How could someone I had raised with so much love, care, and dedication exclude me like that, with a simple comment, so cold and distant? Royal family. Who was he trying to be? Wasn't he my son, the boy I taught to walk, the one I held hands with when he needed it, the one I watched grow, make mistakes, and learn? Now, I was nothing but an intruder in his life, someone who didn't fit into the world he was starting to build. The pain of rejection, of exclusion, was stronger than I ever imagined. I wondered if he knew how deeply those words hurt me. How could someone I called my son now see me as a burden, a piece that doesn't fit in his new puzzle? But what hurt me the most was thinking that he didn't even realize the depth of my pain. He was so immersed in his own life that he didn't see that by excluding me from that dinner. He was excluding me from his life in a much crueler way than I could ever have imagined. I was alone that night, like so many others when loneliness descended upon me. There was no longer Pedro's voice running through the house, no more of his footsteps in the kitchen, the sound of the TV on. Nothing. The emptiness was there, and it was becoming heavier by the minute. Sitting on the couch, I picked up the photo album I had always kept on the shelf. I turned its pages carefully, each photo bringing back memories of happy moments, of laughter shared, of birthday parties, of Sunday gatherings, the smell of the meals I'd prepared for him, the warmth of the stove, the sound of our laughter in the living room. Everything felt so distant now. The photos spoke more than words could. I saw that little boy with curious eyes, the one with the wide-open smile, the one who trusted me for everything. Where was that Pedro? Where was the son who used to ask me to play, who turned to me in his tough moments? I looked at each photo with a mix of love and pain, realizing that his presence now seemed as rare as a memory that fades over time. My heart tightened with each page I turned, each memory that resurfaced. What happened to us? What did I do wrong? I was engulfed by the anguish of that night, without answers and with so many questions. If someone asked me, I wouldn't know how to explain what had changed. I only knew that, day by day, he was becoming more distant, and I felt like a spectator of a story that no longer involved me, a story I no longer understood. Silence consumed me, and the pain of not being his mother anymore, but just a distant and useless woman in his life, enveloped me completely. I didn't know how to change it, or even if it was possible. That night, the silence was even heavier. Pedro had already left, and I was left there, lost in my own thoughts. I knew something needed to change, and it felt like the weight of the world had settled on my shoulders. I looked at the credit card, that piece of plastic that had always been mine, but which now he used so casually. Something inside me told me I could no longer allow him to continue taking advantage like this. The pain of seeing my own son distant, treating me as if I were invisible, could no longer be ignored. So, I decided, without a word, without any warning, to revoke his access to the card. Like a mother who needs to protect her children but is forced to take an unthinkable action, I made this decision without hesitation. I knew that from that moment, things would change in an irreversible way. What was once just a small act of care now became a necessary boundary. Maybe it was too late. Maybe I was trying to fix something that had no return, but I had to do it, for myself, for the dignity I had left. I went to the phone, my hands trembling, and called the bank. The operator on the other side seemed to not understand, but I felt stronger with each word I spoke. I knew that by doing this, I was telling Pedro, without a single word, that I would no longer be his easy source of support. I knew this would hurt him, but I also knew it was necessary. What else could I do, other than preserve my own honor and try to save what was left of our bond? How would he react? I didn't know, but, at that moment, I didn't care so much. I needed peace. The farewell dinner was set for a Friday night. I knew, in a way, he wouldn't invite me, but something inside me still hoped that he would. At least, glance at me and give me one last chance to be part of his new journey. I was wrong. When I saw him walk through the restaurant door with his new family, his eyes shining with happiness, I realized there was no longer any place for me there. They were all so excited, so full of plans, and I was just another spectator, a hollow figure on the edge of his life. The waiter came to the table and asked, as usual, how the payment would be made. Pedro, without hesitation, pulled out the credit card to make the payment. But the machine made a strange noise, and the waiter, somewhat embarrassed, looked at him and said, "Sorry, sir, but this card was not authorized." Those words, simple and cold, like a sharp blade, cut through the air. I, sitting at the table, could see Pedro's face change. He tried again, more insistently, as if he believed he could change the reality with the same gesture, but the response was the same. The card didn't work. I watched everything in silence, as if time had stopped right there. It was as if the world was giving me the chance to see everything I needed to understand that things would not go back to normal. Pedro looked at the waiter, then at me, and I felt a look of anger mixed with shame. He didn't know what to do. I knew he was desperate. And at the same time, I was too. The scene was unsettling, and I felt crushed by the pain of humiliation. He looked at me one more time and, with a sharp gesture, walked away from the table. The embarrassment was just the beginning. When Pedro left the table, without a word, his biological mother, Patricia, who had been sitting next to him, didn't take long to act. She, who had always been so sharp and direct, didn't hesitate for a second. She turned to him with an impassive look and said, "You know you're going to have to pay your share, Petro. This isn't a joke." I could see the coldness in her eyes, as if she had been waiting for this moment, as if she had been calculating exactly what she would do to make him understand that his responsibility there was to take care of everything at once. It was as if she wanted to make it clear that, now, he was no longer my son but someone who should submit to a new kind of loyalty. Pedro looked at her, a bit stunned, and then looked at me, as if seeking an escape, as if he wanted something from me. I was there, quiet, watching the scene, not knowing what to say or do. The pain in my chest was great, but I stayed strong. It wasn't the time to act like the mother, who was always ready to help. I knew what was happening, and the truth was that he was being pulled toward her side, to the biological family, who made him feel perfect and real. I was just a shadow in this scenario. The conversation between Pedro and Patricia was brief but revealing. She insisted that he be responsible, that he wouldn't leave this pending matter hanging. She still treated him as if he were a child, someone who didn't know how to manage on his own. How I wished I could intervene and show him the reality, show him the woman who was there, in silence, waiting for her son. But at the same time, I knew it was no longer my place to interfere. He had made his choice, and as hard as it was time to respect the choices he had made. That night was like a punch to the stomach. Pedro returned to the table, his head down, as if the world had fallen on him. I didn't say a word. It wasn't necessary. The silence between us seemed heavier than any word that could be said. He had a red face, still marked by the humiliation. The waiter, perhaps out of compassion, tried to ease the moment and made a gesture of apology, but Pedro didn't even look at him. He was broken, not just by the embarrassment, but by the certainty that this dinner, which should have been a moment of celebration, had turned into a nightmare. We left the restaurant, and the fresh night air felt sharp. The street was silent, and the city, which had always been a place of comfort, now felt like a maze with no way out. I walked beside him, but the distance between us felt vast. He, with his head down, lost in thought. I, with my chest tight, trying to understand where we had gone wrong. How had we gotten to this point? How had he, that boy full of dreams and promises, turned into someone who avoided me and distanced himself with such coldness? He looked at me once, his eyes filled with anger and pain, and said, "I didn't ask for this, Mom." I knew he wasn't talking to me, but to the reality around him, to the choices he had made. In the car, the silence was deafening. There were no more words. It wasn't the kind of moment any mother expects to experience with her child. I looked out the window and tried to understand what had happened, but the answers felt distant, as if time itself was drifting away from us. When we got home, he rushed out of the car without a word of goodbye. He slammed the door shut, and I was left there, once again, alone. The echo of that slam reverberated in my chest, and I didn't know what to do with the pain. I didn't know what to expect from tomorrow. I woke up early, as always, the silence of the house invading every corner. The coffee was almost ready when I heard the sound of the door slamming, loudly, as if someone wanted to break the air, shattered the silence that had settled between us. Pedro was there, at the door, his eyes wide, his breathing heavy, as if he were carrying a storm inside him. When I saw him, I felt something strange, a mix of pain and anger. He was furious. That boy who used to be my baby, my beloved son, was now standing there, banging on the door, as if he had lost all the manners and respect I once hoped to teach him. "Open the door, Mom," he shouted, almost screaming. The sound of his voice was heavy, thick, full of anger and frustration. I knew what was coming next. He wasn't coming for explanations. He was coming for a fight. His anguish spilled over in every word, in every gesture. How could he have come to this point? How could he not see everything I had done for him? How could he treat me like this after all those years together? I, who had taken him in, raised him, and supported him, was now being treated as if I were a stranger. I took a deep breath before opening the door. I didn't want to be impulsive, didn't want to be swept up by the storm of emotions he was releasing. But when the door opened, he didn't waste time. He didn't wait for a response, not even a look of understanding. He just fired off. His voice choked. "Why did you do that? How could you embarrass me like that? You have no idea what happened after that dinner. You left me hanging, Mom. At least my real mom wouldn't do this." I couldn't stay silent any longer. What Pedro was saying was too cruel, and the pain he was causing me was more than I could bear. I refused to just stand there, listening without saying a word. He was furious, but so was I. My chest felt tight, as though an immense pressure was crushing me from the inside. With my heart racing, I took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes, trying not to let the tears take over. "Pedro, you've completely lost it," I said, my voice trembling, but firm. "I'm not the kind of person who takes pride in embarrassing others. If you think I did this for pleasure, you're very wrong. But you have to understand one thing. No amount of love in the world is enough for someone who chooses to distance themselves, who chooses to ignore the value of someone who truly loves them. I didn't do anything wrong. And you know that what happened at dinner wasn't an embarrassment, it was the reality. And you have to start facing the reality, Pedro. You're treating me like I'm a burden, like I'm nothing but a stranger in your life." He looked at me, his eyes full of anger, and for a moment, it seemed like he was going to interrupt me. But then he fell silent, standing there, as though processing each word. The silence grew heavy, and all I could hear was my breath, trying to control myself. I knew deep down that he wasn't just angry with me, but with the situation, with the change, with the transformation that was happening in his life. A transformation he didn't want to be a part of, and that, in some way, was destroying me. I still saw him as my son, the boy who had come to me with bright eyes, full of dreams, but now he was distant, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to reach him again. The pain I felt overflowed, like a river breaking its banks, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. The words came out unfiltered, like a confession I had kept for so long. You think I didn't see everything you did, that I didn't notice your choices. You chose your biological mother, Pedro. You chose her, and left me behind. You made me believe that I was an obstacle in your life, like I was responsible for everything that was happening to you. And I gave you so much love, Pedro. I gave you my life. Do you think I don't know that you started seeing everything I did for you as an obligation, a burden you'd have to carry? I stopped, breathless, my throat tight, but I couldn't stop talking anymore. He needed to hear everything I had kept inside, all the anguish that had built up in my chest, all the emotional weariness that ate at me day by day. You were my son, Pedro, my son, no matter what happens, but you made the choice to leave me behind, to relegate me to the past, as if it was something you could erase. And believe me, that hurts more than any words you've said to me. I lived my whole life thinking you loved me, but you made me realize that maybe you never did. I'm not just the woman who raised you. I'm a mother, Petro. I'm the person who was there when no one else was. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. I knew he didn't want to hear that, but he needed to hear it, because, even if the words were harsh, they were the truth. And maybe, deep down, what he needed was that truth. What he needed, more than anything, was to understand what he had lost by making the choices he made. But I knew there was still something inside him that kept him from seeing all that. Something I couldn't change anymore. The next morning, the door slammed. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I heard heavy footsteps at the entrance. He was there, on the other side of the door, and the sound of his breath, hurried and tense, made my heart race. I didn't know what he wanted. The pain he caused me at dinner was still fresh, and even though my heart wanted me to run and hug him, I remained firm. I knew he needed to understand what he had done, and I could no longer be the one chasing after him. Not anymore. Grandma, he called, his voice softer than I imagined. Forgive me, I acted wrong. I was confused. I didn't want to hurt you. You've always been by my side, and I failed you. Those words were like a knife piercing my chest, but at the same time, I knew he wasn't apologizing just for what he had done. He was apologizing because he realized that his choice to distance himself from me left him empty, lost. I took a deep breath before opening the door, and seeing him there, with tears in his eyes, I couldn't help but let out a sigh. But still, I couldn't give in, not now. I looked at him, and calmly said, Pedro, it's too late for this apology. I loved you more than anything, more than anyone could love. But you made your choices, and I can't be the person who forgives you every time. Forgiveness has to come from you too. It has to come with actions, not words. I can't be your crutch anymore, Pedro. And, as much as you hurt me, the truth is that for our relationship to heal, you'll need to face what you've done and confront it head on. He was there, in front of me, not knowing what to do, and the pain I saw in his eyes, deep down, was reflecting the pain I felt myself. But, as hard as it was, I knew this was the only way for him to learn the real lesson. The next day, Pedro showed up again, but this time something seemed different. He wasn't holding himself like someone coming to apologize, but more like someone who had had a revelation. The way he looked at me, as if trying to find a word that would be enough to express everything he was going through inside, was like he was finally starting to understand what I had been trying to tell him for so long. I watched him approach, hesitant, and before I could ask, he spoke. Grandma, I don't know what to do with all this. I watched him carefully, not rushing to answer. What do you mean, my son? I asked, knowing very well where this was going. He sighed, and with a trembling voice, continued. My biological mother, she's not what I thought. I didn't feel at home there. I was so desperate to find something that would give me meaning, something that would make me feel complete, but I ended up losing myself more. She didn't accept me like I expected. I idealized her so much, Grandma, and now I see that what I wanted didn't exist. Silence filled the room, and in that moment, a wave of understanding passed through my body. It wasn't about the biological mother. It never was. He just wanted, more than anything, to feel loved, accepted, like every child desires. But he had looked in the wrong place. I was the family he needed, but he had only realized that now, after losing himself a little more, and, deep down, my sadness ran even deeper. He had to walk away to understand how empty his previous choice was. I was in the living room, alone, when the phone rang. The sound cut through the silence of the house, and when I looked at the number, a chill ran down my spine. It was her, Patricia, Pedro's biological mother. I already knew what was coming, and as much as I wanted to ignore it, something told me I couldn't. I picked up the phone with a trembling hand, and before I could say a word, she fired away. Lisa, I know you're hurt, but you need to understand that I am his real mother. I gave birth to him, and you don't have the right to interfere in our relationship. I listened to her in silence, letting her heavy words fall on me, but not letting myself be affected. She wanted to manipulate me, make me feel like I was an intruder in Pedro's life, like the pain he was feeling was my fault. Her voice, cold and calculating, tried to build a wall between us. And the saddest part was that she still believed she could push me out of the way. I knew that this call was just another attempt to undo what Pedro had discovered and, most importantly, to make him go back to her. But that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted him to see that true family isn't the one you're born into, but the one you build. Patricia's words kept echoing in my mind, but I knew that my mission, what I needed to do now, was to remain firm. You don't understand, do you, Patricia? I finally said, my voice calm but full of strength. Pedro needs time, and you're not the one who's going to take me out of his life. I was his mother, and that no one can erase. That day was harder than I expected. After the call with Patricia, the weight in my chest just grew heavier. I found myself sitting on the couch, my hands trembling, staring at the photos scattered across the table. So many memories of moments I thought I would never forget, but now they seemed so distant. Pedro was lost, trying to find himself in a place that wasn't his, and I, not knowing what to do, felt nothing but helpless. As a mother, as a woman, as a human being, all these years of dedication and love seemed to have been wiped away by something I couldn't control. And it was there, in that empty room, that I finally broke down. I cried like I hadn't in a long time. It wasn't just tears of sadness, but of anger, frustration, disillusionment. I found myself speaking out loud, without realizing, why can't he see? I raised him, gave everything for him, and now he prefers to believe her cold words. How could someone who called me mom now treat me like a burden? It was as if all the emotions I had kept inside exploded at once, and I couldn't hold back any longer. Tears fell uncontrollably, as if the weight of the world was on my shoulders, and all I wanted to do was scream to the universe, why, God, why doesn't he understand? I needed to say everything I had been holding back. However, after a long sigh, I made a silent decision. I couldn't be the link that kept everything together anymore. I needed to let him face reality, no matter how hard it was. Maybe that was what he needed to finally see what had always been right in front of him. The next day, the door slammed hard. The sound hit me like a punch in the stomach. I already knew who it was. Pedro was there again. But this time, he wasn't wearing the look of regret, like last time. No, what I saw was anger. He walked in, slammed the door behind him, and before he said a word, he fired away. You have no right to talk to my mother like that. What you said to her was disrespectful. Now, have you decided to become my enemy? Is that what you want? I slowly stood up. I didn't want to shout. I didn't want to argue. But I knew that deep inside me, there was something that had to be said. And then, he dropped the bombshell that froze my heart. I'm going to choose my real mother. You know, I'm not a kid anymore, Lisa, and I'm tired of hearing you talk bad about the woman who gave me life. He was furious, and the words came out with such anger, as if everything I had built was a house of cards about to fall. But I couldn't let that slide. My voice, calm but firm, came out before I even thought about it. Pedro, what you still don't understand is that the real mother isn't the one who brought you into this world, but the one who chooses you every day. I raised you, I taught you, and I gave you my unconditional love, even when you didn't see it. Now, you're letting yourself be fooled by words that make no sense. I'm not your enemy. I'm the woman who loved you, and always will, no matter what. He looked at me with an empty expression, as if he no longer knew who I was. And right then, in that moment, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The following days were filled with painful silence. I knew something had to change, but I didn't want it to be this way, not like this. However, the pain of rejection and humiliation gave me the clarity I needed. Pedro had made his choice, and I, mine. I decided that I would no longer play a role in a story I was meant to live. That college account, which meant so much to him, became nothing more than a reminder of everything I no longer wanted to carry. With a simple click, I did what I never thought I'd be able to do. I closed his college account, not looking back. But it wouldn't end there. I knew that over time, he would see the consequences of his choices. That's when I made another decision. I would create a trust fund for him, but not in the way he expected. It wouldn't be about endlessly paying for his dreams anymore. It would be a reminder of the responsibility and maturity he would need to develop throughout his life. That money would be his, but under conditions. A lesson he would learn, no matter how bitter. And with that, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, as if I were finally letting go of the last tie that bound me to the past. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that set us free. Just as I was about to finalize the trust documents, the phone rang. It was Petro. As always, he tried to maintain the facade that nothing was happening. "Hey Mom, how are you? I wanted to talk to you about the college payment. I know we had a fight, but I need help with the tuition, you understand, right?" He didn't know what was about to happen. And at that moment, I realized how much things had changed. He still called me Mom, but it was empty, as if the words no longer carried weight. And I, with my decision already made, responded, "No, Pedro, I can't do that anymore. You'll have to figure it out on your own now." I no longer expected anything from Pedro, but still, the message that arrived on my phone took me by surprise. The sound of the phone vibrating on the table in the living room was like a snap in the air. My heart skipped a beat. It was him. A simple glance at the screen, and I immediately saw those sharp words that cut through me again. Not my mother. You never were. I don't know why I wasted so much time with you. I was ungrateful, and you took advantage of me. You destroyed everything we built." I stood frozen, staring at those words that somehow seemed unreal, but knew exactly where to hurt me. I read and reread those messages more than once. The smell of the house, the wind outside, everything seemed to freeze. How could someone I considered my son have come to this point? I felt completely empty, as if the love and effort of all those years had been turned into a waste. But more than the pain, what shook me was the absence of regret. He was blinded by anger and the influence of others. When the phone vibrated again, I already knew what was coming, but still, I answered. His voice, colder than ever, simply said, "Don't contact me anymore. I don't need you. Goodbye, Lisa." I didn't know if what I felt was anger or sadness. At a moment like that, everything seemed to blur together. The tears, the ones I never allowed to fall, were there, wanting to escape, but I held them back, as I always did. I took a deep breath, deleted that message, and set the phone aside. Sometimes, the pain is so great that we try to deny it, but deep down, we know that something has been lost forever. I didn't know what drove me when, on an ordinary day, I decided to open that drawer. I don't know if it was the desire to find something old, perhaps a memory, or simply the need to fill an immense emptiness that was spreading inside me. When I put my hand among the papers, a yellowed letter stood out. The letter was there, hidden, as if it wanted to protect itself from me, but fate had led me to it. It was addressed to Pedro. The simple sight of it made me lose my courage for a moment, but something inside me urged me to open it. And then, as I read those words, I was overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Pedro had written, many years ago, about his pain, his doubts, and more than anything, about abandonment. The letter wasn't just filled with words from someone lost, but also from a heart that, in that moment, couldn't understand the complexity of unconditional love. It was as if he already knew, in some way, that what I thought was a solid foundation was starting to crumble. I felt each word as if it were a sharp knife, cutting not only the present but also my own hopes. "I love you, Mom, but I'm losing myself. I don't know who I am in this family anymore." That confession shattered me. I had always known he carried a weight, but I didn't realize it was so heavy. I closed the letter with trembling hands. I had heard so much silence in the past few days that that piece of paper seemed louder than 1,000 screams. I felt a deep pain, and at the same time, a sense that, in some way, I understood what he was going through. But the weight of reading those words made me question everything I thought I knew about my relationship with him. Could it be that he was right? Was this the price of unconditional love? Abandonment in the name of someone's freedom who, deep down, was never able to understand the pain of another. The questions echoed in my mind, but I already knew that, in my position, the only way forward would be to move on, with or without him. I stood there, frozen, at the door of his room, looking at the suitcases that were already packed. The house was silent, as if the walls were also waiting, or maybe even breathing, before the storm. It wasn't just about sending his things. It was more than that. It was a severance. I knew that within those suitcases lay the end of something I once called family. His clothes, the scattered books, the photos, everything was being packed to be returned to a son who no longer recognized me. As someone who had been through so much, I knew there was nothing more to say, just the need to let go. I closed my eyes for a moment, and it felt like time stopped, as if those suitcases were a symbol, a representation of all the time I spent trying to build something solid, something real between us. And yet, all that remained was this, suitcases full of memories and a piercing silence. I didn't want more words, didn't want more empty promises. I knew he had his path, and I had mine. I packed the suitcases, and with the same calmness that had followed me throughout my life, I did what needed to be done. There was no anger, no sadness, just the weight of a decision made with a heavy heart, but one that was necessary. When the college car arrived to take his things, I simply handed them over. We didn't exchange a word. He didn't even look me in the eye. Somewhere inside me, I knew that this was more than just a goodbye. It was a release, a liberation for myself. As the suitcases disappeared through the gate, I felt as if I was finally letting go of something that was never really mine. I refused to cry. There was something inside me, a silent strength, telling me that a mother's love wasn't about holding on, but about letting them follow their own path. And, even if it cost me everything, I knew it was the right thing. The phone rang in the middle of the night. It was a voice message. One of those you feel deep in your chest even before you hear it. Just the sound of his voice already brought me a mix of emotions I didn't want to carry anymore. I knew there was nothing left to say, but the mere fact that he recorded it left me uneasy. I ran my fingers over the screen, hesitated, but couldn't help but listen. "Mom, I'm sorry. I think I was wrong. His voice broke at the end. There was regret there, but a distance that couldn't be ignored. It was a message without reconciliation, as if he was still trying to figure out what had happened. Those words touched me deeply, but at the same time, they weren't enough to heal the open wound. How can a mother forgive if, in reality, there was never a true explanation for the abandonment? He spoke of mistakes, but didn't mention the choices he made, or the pain he caused me. I listened, but I knew there was more, something he wasn't willing to admit. The pain he felt was real, but the disappointment I carried couldn't be erased with words. That regret wasn't enough. For forgiveness to be possible, he would need to understand how much he had distanced himself, how much he had left me behind, before anything else. When I finished listening, the pain seemed greater than before. Not because of the lack of an apology, but because of the feeling that he could never truly understand what he had done. I deleted the message without responding. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that, in some way, this would be part of my process. Because sometimes, the absence of words is the greatest sign that, no matter how much you love someone, time and choices make it impossible to go back. I look out the window and see the sun beginning to set. Something about this moment, the soft light and the stillness, brings a sense of peace that I haven't felt in a long time. I've always been a woman of struggle, of giving everything for those I loved. But over these years, I've learned that the greatest act of love we can offer someone, even our children, is our own emotional health. And that often requires making tough choices. As a mother, as a woman, I am the first to say, we cannot lose ourselves completely in the name of love for others. We cannot let the pain and frustrations of others consume us to the point where we no longer recognize ourselves. For a long time, I allowed myself to believe that unconditional love meant giving without expecting anything in return. But I learned, at the cost of many tears and sleepless nights, that love must have boundaries. What happened with my son was not my fault. His choices, the distances he created, the words he never said, that is no longer my burden. I am not responsible for his decisions. And, at last, I understood that, for my own survival, I needed to stop carrying that weight. Life goes on, and we must go on too, even when the people we love take paths that leave us behind. Self-care is not selfishness, it is a necessity. I leave here my story, but I also leave a reminder for all the women listening to me. You deserve to live with dignity, with self-love, with the certainty that you are enough, no matter what others may think or do. Don't let circumstances or the mistakes of others define who you are. Look at yourselves with kindness and respect. This is how we move forward. I am Lisa, and I've learned that the end of one cycle is, in fact, the beginning of something new. May we all have the courage to follow our own paths. Until next time.